Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the forum. We will now proceed to the high-level opening panel discussion. And in this session, we're going to discuss current state of the Internet's interoperability, potential impacts from technical infrastructure, regulatory and commercial developments, as well as the challenges and opportunities in maintaining an interoperable Internet. I will now hand the floor to the moderator for the session, Dr. Kenny Huang. Dr. Huang, the floor is yours.
Okay, right. Thank you. Good morning again. My name is Kenny Huang. It's my pleasure to host in this particular section. Let me quickly introduce the panelists on my left-hand side, starting from Nicole Zhang. She was the former chairperson of the National Communication Commission, and also right now she's a co-chair of Address Supporting Organization in ICANN. And next to Nicole will be George. He's the head of global policy in Zoom. And after George, we should have a panelist online. Let me check whether she's online or not. It's May Ann Lim from Fair Tech Institute. Whether May is here? Okay. Okay, she's online. We couldn't hear the voice. But anyway, the next one will be Jialong Luo from ICANN VP in Asia-Pac. And the next one will be the Paul Wilson, Director General of APNIC. So starting from today's this section's topic, maintaining the interoperable of Internet, and also try to find a way to prevent the Internet fragmentation. That will be the hot topic in the Internet community for the last couple of years. It's a pass over to the first panelist. So each panelist have more than 10 minutes to introduce what you try to cover and what kind of topic you try to present to the audience. So starting from Nicole Zhang, and the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be here to share some thoughts about the topic. Today, my topic will be maintaining an interoperable Internet. I think, as Kenny mentioned, that this is a very hot and critical topic because it covers so many different aspects about the Internet governance. So. Sorry, who I am. I'm Nicole. I think Kenny already introduced me, and I think most of the friends here, you know me, so I dropped this. Okay, so my online today will include setting the scene and the current situation, and put these perspectives and how to respond the issue. So to start off, I'd like to set up the scene and urge us to consider this question. Why are we sitting here today talking about the challenges you faced when maintaining an interoperable Internet? I think most of us cannot live without the Internet anymore. We do almost everything on it. Staying in touch with friends and family, work, shopping, doing business, and looking for directions, searching answers. Especially recently, we use GPT, generative AI, to search in different kind of answers, ask them to assist us to work. And also for our super random and detailed questions, translations, doing our tax, online banking, and all things you name it. So as much as we enjoy the benefit result from the Internet becoming an intrinsic element of the modern society, we are also facing challenges it brings to or make more severe to our world. For example, you can see from the slide, cybercrime erode our trust for the Internet and bring harms to people. While data protection regulations have effectively enhanced our data privacy, different ideas are and practices of these regulations in different sovereignties have also allegedly international business and fighting crime online. And needless to say, digital trade and the global supply chains are now an intergovernmental battlefield. So, last but not least, as it is one of the issues that concerns us in Taiwan the most, the wrestling between two cyber superpower, the US and China, has reached a new level with multiple sanctions and building digital alliance against each other. So in Taiwan, the internet governance and all the issues related to today's topic, I think we are caring about that. I think maybe more than all of the world. So as Wolfgang said that, I think Wolfgang was the keynote speaker last year engagement forum. He said that 20 years ago, internet governance was a technical issue with political implications. Today, it is a political issue with a technical component. So I think I will agree with him. And when talking about the internet and fragmentation, sometimes referred to as the Splinternet, it is important that we should be clear of which part of the internet, as well as what kind of fragmentation we are talking about. That is, I think this concept I have noticed for many times when I participate a different kind of conference or forum. I think many speakers and audience, and no matter from public or private sector, they cannot focusing on the same issue. Yeah, because we are talking about different things, although we use the same terminology. So it is important that we should be clear of which part of the internet, as well as what kind of fragmentation we are talking about. So let's see the current situation, what's happening now. As you can see from the slides, people don't even have the same ideas of how internet should be layered. There are OSI model, the TCP/IP model, but what I personally find the most accurate when examining internet fragmentation is the model on the right. You can see the WEF white paper, including content and the transaction layer, application layer, transport layer, network IP layer, and the physical link layer. The model is proposed in 2016 by Will Drake, Dr. Vincerf, and Wolfgang in their white paper for the WEF. According to the paper, in order to effectively discuss how the internet is actually used and how that usage may be impeded, we will need this addition of the fifth normal layers, I mean, in the right part of the slide. The model, in the white paper, the authors have also came up with 3 forms of fragmentation. That include the technical fragmentation, mostly happen on the lower 4 layers, while governmental and commercial fragmentation are more often found in layer 5. However, this is just how they usually happen, but not always. I can raise some example, put in these perspectives. Fragmentation, what do we mean when we are saying the internet is fragmented? So you can see from the slide, I can take some example. In a walled garden, the application or service provider can have complete control over its own digital space, governing its inhabitants and their behavior via its terms of services. Mandatory data localization refers to the governmental requirement that control the storage and the flow of data to keep it within a particular jurisdiction. And the DNS, RPZ, has Kenny mentioned about that? RPZ we used in Taiwan as well, right?
Yes, a little bit.
A little bit, in some case, It's also commonly referred to as the DNS firewall. And the alternative route can mean a lot of things. Example include, Russia has mentioned about that, is Russian national DNS. And you can see some proposal from EU last year, and the blockchain DNS as well. And internet shutdown, it's a severe thing, means slowing down or blocking major communication channel or entire communication networks, usually done by the government in some specified region. According to the report published by UN Human Rights Office last year, the dramatic real-life effect of internet shutdown on people's lives and human rights have been vastly underestimated. Okay. So you can see some other cyber sovereignties issues and sanctions and privacy shield. I don't know whether you noticed that this morning I noticed the news, the EU also make a decision for the penalty for the Meta because of the data transaction from Europe to American. So that's the case for the privacy shield. So as we can see, what are the consequences? If different layers of fragmentation caused some consequences. For example, the failure of critical infrastructure, the degradation of user experience, the user confusion, business service disruption, and undermining human rights. So how do we respond? What can we do to counter international fragmentation? Of course, people have not been sitting idly, so we can see so many different cases, people from different sectors make efforts to try to work together. For example, UN open-ended working groups and ad hoc committee and international negotiation, discussion forum in the Internet Society ecosystem, cross-jurisdiction cooperation, and norm setting as the speakers mentioned before this morning, and the best practices sharing. So, sorry, you should see other cases. Okay, in other cases you can see from the, for example, the roadmap of digital cooperation and the resource of public key infrastructure, RPKI, and etc. So I think we see the problem caused by the internet fragmentation, and we know the situation for the time being. And I think all people from the internet community, we are trying to work together to solve the problem, to set up different mechanism. Of course, it's from the multiple stakeholders. So we work together as the global multiple stakeholder community, and I think we should work together in the future. Thank you. That's my favorite sharing.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. We leave all the Q&A to the final, and so next one will be Josh. Would you like to comment based on today's topic?
Yeah, it's okay if I sit here? Okay, great. Well, I will keep my remarks relatively brief just because I figure people have heard enough from me already. So, as you might suspect, just given my remarks earlier, I approach the concept of internet fragmentation from a somewhat different perspective, which is good, because I probably know less than everybody else in this room about internet governance in the ICANN context, in the context in which this conference takes place. And I was actually remarking in the brief interview out there that I feel a little bit intimidated by all this experience, but I'm actually learning a lot already. When I think about internet fragmentation, I just think about the ways in which governments around the world pursuing their sovereign interests take actions that in the moment and maybe over time are in the national interests, but sort of have collectively perverse results when it comes to our global shared interests and in all of the benefits that the internet can provide, whether related to expression, whether related to economic growth, even whether related to security. And it is certainly the case that we're in a much more geopolitically fraught environment now than we were 5 or 10 years ago, which makes these issues even more pressing. But I suppose our evaluation of where we are on internet fragmentation in the context in which I'm describing it sort of depends on perspective. Like it's easy on the one hand to say, oh wow, I mean governments are really just creating a splinternet, they're going all kinds of different directions, there's limited coordination, we're going to deprive ourselves of all of the benefits that a global internet has. On the other hand, I think there are a lot of ways to look at the developments we've seen in the world over the last several years and say, wow, for such a complex world with a lot of geopolitical tension and differences in values, we're actually doing okay. I tend to place myself a little bit more in the first camp just because I think that the benefits of a global internet are so profound that we should be doing whatever we can to encourage governments and other stakeholders to move in the same direction. But when you sit back and think about how much of a common approach we have in certain areas, I think it is remarkable. So one thing I've noticed, and I base this not just on my time at Zoom, but probably more on my time several years ago as a trade negotiator and then representing the global tech sector as a whole, is that public policy people in particular and global internet people, we wring our hands a lot. We sort of complain about the fact that we can't get governments to have exactly the same approach. We have a limited number of trade agreements out there. We have a limited number of other accords that set out identical language and identical commitments that everybody is going to sign on to. And we hear terms being used like harmonization. Harmonization should be the objective of our approach to privacy or our approach to cybersecurity or our approach to developing tools to make internet access more accessible. Another term we hear is mutual recognition. Well, we understand that every government is different, there are important cultural nuances, but why can't we move more towards a world where one government mutually recognizes the approach that another takes and vice versa? And both of those ideals are hard to come by, and that's because governments and the societies that they represent do have very strong and unique national or regional interests, and there are differences in policy preferences that are legitimate. They're not going to go away. We probably don't want them to go away. So in my mind, the concept that is more useful in thinking through what we're striving for is the concept of approximation, not harmonization, not doing everything identical, not mutually recognize, not insisting that we mutually recognize, but generally moving in the same direction and harnessing all of the tools that we have out there, multi-stakeholder conversations, international organizations, trade negotiations, independent development of norms, to keep moving in that direction. And the idea is, let's stop wringing our hands. This is a really difficult, complex world. Let's take as a given that countries are going to define their interests differently. And I will say, as a former US trade negotiator, I think this is a thing that the United States has struggled to do. We had an approach to trade negotiations that was very brittle. It was very one size fits all. It was very, take it or leave it. And what happens when any government has an approach like that is you have a small number of successes, and you might have some good successes, but you just exclude such a significant portion of the world from whatever the endeavor is that you're trying to gain support for. So I'm much more of a fan of approaches to convergence on internet issues, convergence on the digital rules of the road that are flexible and therefore resilient, that seek to aim for a globally sort of consistent purpose, but in a locally tailored way. And I think there are a few examples that illustrate this, and actually I think, Nicole, you sort of touched on many of them. I was involved in the negotiations that led to the Privacy Shield about 6 or 7 years ago between the US and the EU. And one thing that struck me, and I think both Americans and Europeans still tend to do it to each other, is we create these cartoonish representations of each other. You know, the EU, you know, Europeans can't innovate, so they have to regulate, and that's why they impose these heavy-handed privacy rules on us. Oh, you know, Americans, it's just sort of this wild, lawless environment. They don't care about fundamental rights. And of course, neither reality is true. But what I observed happening in that process that was reassuring was that over time, from two very different both legal traditions and two very, actually quite different traditions around personal data protection, there was an appreciation of the core interests that united both EU citizens and US citizens around a baseline level of privacy. And of course, this is an adventure that kind of continues to run its course, and it keeps trying to find its permanent legal footing. But there is a basis there. It's very messy, and it took a long time, but there is a basis there for feeling hopeful about US and EU efforts to approximate their approaches. And it's now actually receiving, there's some additional approximation happening from the APEC cross-border privacy rules system, which has been sort of growing in popularity a little bit in the shadows over the last several years. But I think we're approaching a level of approximation on global data privacy rules that's very encouraging, and that we should consider to be an example. Another promising one is just the leadership Japan has shown in the G7 and just kind of in the international setting generally with data free flows with trust over the last several years. What is that thing? Nobody knows, but it doesn't matter because it's the idea that is resonating. We kind of get the idea. We don't know if we're going to have it in a binding international agreement or a set of norms, but everybody sort of understands we want data to move, but we want it to be trusted. And how can we move towards a formula for organizations, institutions, norms, rules, or whatever that serves us? So I think I'll just conclude and say the objective we should have is to understand where our common interests are and to kind of try to focus less on the differences in approach that annoy us, whether, one country has a common law system, another has a civil law system, for example, and work on the substance and work on the things that unite us and use whatever tools we have out there. And this, group is such a great example of what multi-stakeholderism can provide in that regard to try to drive forward to some common successes on these issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Let's move to the next one. It will be May An from Fair Tech Institute. I believe May An is online right now. Are you online?
Can you hear me?
Yes, so the floor is yours. Thank you.
Can you see me? Am I on the screen?
Yes, we
Hi，大
can.
家好，我名叫美安，不好意思没机会跟你们一起分享在台湾。My name is Mei An. I'm really sorry that I'm not able to join all of you in Taiwan itself. I understand I'm missing out some great food. Today we're going to be chatting a little bit about what our institute, what we are thinking about when it comes to maintaining an interoperable internet, the challenges and opportunities. A lot of the work that we're doing at the FairTech Institute really focuses on the idea of what exactly is, inverted commas, is fair, and where we can ensure that there are different communities are included within the development and can make use of the internet when it comes to economic opportunities. I love that Josh is focused very much on observing how, for example, privacy rules have sort of leveled up across the world, and we have reached a sort of good standard by which we're addressing privacy issues and are also making sure that we are including a lot of people within and protecting people within those regulations. But some of the work that we're doing focuses a little bit more on the technology. I'm going to cover 4 main points and then I'll pass it back to Kenny really quickly. The first is internet interoperability. The second is on interoperability and security. The third is on next generation tech interoperability. And here I'll talk a little bit about the metaverse and Web3 technologies, and then AI and interoperability. I leave everybody with a bit of a question on the new developments for new technologies. Are we running ourselves into obsolescence, or is this the next level, or we just haven't thought about AI and interoperability just yet? So without further ado, let me just chat. I've got 3 slides, as you can see, so don't worry. It's very short discussion and for us to chat about. I don't want to spend too much on interoperability and internet operability. I believe that there are many other models that you can see here that you can find online and obviously within the community that you all exist in. To your left and to your right, sitting in the audience and sitting on the stage, are experts from around the region on how we can ensure internet continues to be interoperable. So I don't believe that we're really focused on this. Where I think a lot of the discussions have trended towards is around the idea of interoperability and security issues, because we're constantly always finding various security loopholes, or I think even worse, there are opportunities where internet security is fantastic from a technical standpoint, but there are social engineering challenges that prevent us from ensuring the full interoperability and security. And the more interoperable certain things are, the more inverted commas vulnerabilities there are. When you speak to security experts, for example, as long as you open another API, as long as you open another door into the secure house that you've built, that means that there is an additional layer of vulnerability that you've opened up. And for security experts, this makes people who want very high security very nervous, and therefore interoperability is almost on the opposite side of that security discussion. It's a continued discussion. I'd be really interested to hear what everybody in the audience actually has to say about this, whether or not I guess the question is interoperability really on the opposite side of security, or is there a happy compromise that we can have? I mean, the more doors that you have, the idea is that it means that it's less secure, but is it always true? I'll park the whole idea of social engineering and scams, for example, to one side, because that's a whole other different ballgame, and there's a cybersecurity discussion and the human security discussion. But the idea of interoperability and security, is it true that they're on opposite sides of the fence? So this is my point number 1 and point number 2. And my last slide is really around next generation tech interoperability, Web3 and the metaverse, and AI and interoperability. So here you can see on the slide that I have up that the metaverse architecture introduces a change or additional layers, what we know of the internet layer already. We've got obviously the usual data layer, and of course, if you want, you can go to the 5 layer, the 7 layer, model. Again, those are all technical details which are very, very well known. But on the metaverse infrastructure, you can see that they use a different, or that industry and the people in Web3 and metaverse are using new tech terms to describe things which need to be interoperable. So whether or not we're actually we're able to communicate with this community is a question. So I'm talking about the human-to-human interoperability. Are we talking to each other? Because look at how they're describing it: perception layer, creator level layer, environment layer, infrastructure level. And I think that we, as fairly technical people, we're usually stepping in the infrastructure layer and the environment layer, and to some extent the applications that exist at the creator level. But the perception layer, where you have interfaces and representation with rendering engines, with human sensors, wearables, etc., that sort of blurs a little bit. Where does the NFT sit? Where does crypto sit, for example? So in that sense, when we're talking about maintaining an interoperable internet, I think that this is both an opportunity as well as a challenge for all of us. It's an opportunity because there are more things to play with. And I say things in the concept of it, like, for example, the Internet of Things. We have more things now to play with. We have more things to need to be interoperable. But then again, it comes back to that challenge, right? Where exactly are we fitting all of these into existing structures? And the bigger question also is there a threat of winner takes all, for example? Is there one ring to rule them all, so to speak, or one interoperable structure that is going to be coming up and saying that, well, economies of scale means why don't you just interface with me and we'll just do the interoperability in and of itself? Or, like some other people on the panel probably have described, are we looking at more of a fragmented approach where if you want to build out that zone for yourself, you start to build little walls around your gardens. And that's a little bit of a challenge because, as we all know, that internet fragmentation and device fragmentation and interoperable fragmentation is a little bit of a challenge. This is bumping up, again, from where the FairTech Institute and Access Partnership sits. This is bumping up against commercial challenges because obviously if you've created a new product, you want to gain the maximum economic benefit from it. You want to make sure that you protect your investment in your intellectual property. So you don't want to make it so easily available and interoperable as soon as you can, just because it might not, I'm not saying it doesn't, but it might not fulfill your, for example, investors or your business desires or your business needs at that point in time. So that's a little bit of a question. How are we fitting in the next gen technologies and the next generation of things, such as the metaverse things, into interoperability? Which leads me to the next new thing that's gotten put on our desks this year, which is the issue of AI and interoperability. Right now, we haven't really explored too much around the idea of AI and interoperability. So far, the ball has been on the inventor's court, and as primarily for the consumers at least, as a primarily web-driven interface, as a web-driven, for example, if you're using ChatGPT or BART, it tends to be a little bit more focused on what it can do as opposed to the questions around interoperability on the background. But AI, I think, has had a good start because it's been most of the new technologies from AI have been open source, which is always great for the idea of interoperability and, again, for leveling the playing field when it comes to enabling the access and accessibility of new technologies. So the question that I have put up on the slide is really, are we running ourselves into obsolescence, or is this the new level of interoperability? Running ourselves into obsolescence because I'm not quite sure whether AI, for example, is going to do creative destruction of certain technologies. Are we running ourselves, for example, into obsolescence? Maybe nobody needs to write essays anymore. I know a lot of my friends who are teachers are a little bit nervous about that. I think that a lot of our questions around AI and interoperability, maybe we haven't quite thought about it just yet. I was looking at a slide the other day that marked the new technologies and what is the time that it took to get 50 million users, I think. And I believe Facebook and the social medias all were like a couple of years or a couple of months, and it just got shorter and shorter and shorter to the point where, for example, the telephone was like a few years to reach ubiquity. But ChatGPT, I think 4 days or something to reach ubiquity, which creates a really accelerated timeline when it comes to adoption of new technologies, and it will impact how we as policymakers, we as academics, we as practitioners who are dealing with the actual technology and are building the technology are going to be asking ourselves and answering questions around interoperability. I hope this has been useful. My email is on the slide if you want to email me, or I'm more than happy to chat with you. And please ask your questions on this discussion. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will turn the time back to Kenny.
Okay, thank you, May, and thank you introduce the architecture for Web3, Metaverse, and AI. I think the layering design architecture is good is some kind of human intervention for conceptualize the ontology, and it's good for communication, not only for the machine, but as well as it's good for communication to the people as well. So let's pass to another important layer design, the controller. Jialong from ICANN specific control for certain layer. You can jump over ICANN. Okay, Jialong, pass over to you.
Thank you. All right, so I'll jump straight into, I'll make 2 points, addressing 2 questions. I think the first thing, talking about interoperable internet and Splinternet, is defining the problem statement. So the first object in the statement is internet. I don't think, if even looking at, there are many models, but from my perspective, like I mentioned during the opening remarks, and Kenny supplemented it, internet, what is internet? And fundamentally, internet is that which allows my device to connect to your device and vice versa. And I mentioned there are only 3 things that you really need that allows you to do that. That's having an IP address, then you have to have a domain name, and you code all the devices using the same protocols. In other words, the devices all speak the same language. Everything else, in my view, is technically not internet because content sits on top of the internet. So it's not internet per se. Even the hardware infrastructure, in other words, the routers or the 3G spectrum, 4G spectrum, etc., they're not technically internet. So the technology that allows for internet are actually these 3 unique identifiers. So I hope that sticks with you. You need unique identifiers for the internet to happen, and the unique identifiers are domain names, IP addresses, and protocols. Now, of course, we can argue certain points, but I'm going to define this area because defining this definition of internet allows us to then further tackle the problem statement. I'll just use one prototype for you to understand why I make a point about this. So in the context of, for example, data localization. So, we think about some governments want Zoom to keep all the data in your data center in one country and not transfer it somewhere else. So that is one issue in internet governance, right? It's being discussed and debated quite actively. But fundamentally, if we no longer use the same DNS, the same domain name system, the same unique identifiers, that problem goes away immediately. Because even if Zoom wanted to, they can't. They can't transfer data anywhere else because there is no unifying unique identifier system that allows you to transfer data across a set of protocols. So fundamentally, you need the unique identifiers for you to do that. So when we come back to the question of internet, this is how I define internet. Basically, you need the unique identifiers. Now, incidentally, these unique identifiers are what makes the internet interoperable. Because if you want to join a network, get some IP addresses from Paul, and you can join the network. That's it. That's what it is. And you just need to follow the same standards, and you can join the network. Any new technology we're talking about today, people think about it as more proprietary. So how Mayan talked about it, for example, metaverse. Let's say I want to set up my own metaverse as a company. Meta. They wanted to set up a metaverse, right? But what they want is people joining their platform, but they don't want them to join other platforms. But what the internet does is, it's just the same platform. Everybody uses it. How you want to use it is up to you. But it is the same platform anybody can join. So, very interesting part is the interoperability of the internet requires these three areas that I just described, the unique identifiers. Now, when we talk about Splinternet, from my perspective, the internet becomes splintered when we no longer share the same domain name system. We no longer use the same unique identifier system that we're using today. Is that possible? Technically, yes, because you don't have to use the same DNS that ICANN is helping to coordinate and manage. You can set up your own if you want. And there are some players who do have that. And when you have different unique identifier systems that don't talk to each other, basically they become intranets, just separate intranets from one another. Related to this point is that what are the, so when we talk about Splinternet, the question then is there a problem? So use a model for defining problems, which is the imminence, likelihood, and impact. So is there an imminence, a possibility of something, of the internet splintering like now? What is the likelihood, and what is the impact? So talking about these three, the impact is quite clear. If we don't have a single unifying internet that we all have today, the impact is quite clear, right? Like, I can no longer talk to anybody else across the world. I may only be restricted to my own country or jurisdiction. That has a very high impact. What's the imminence, though? So there are a couple of areas that push us closer and closer to this. So the first is, as Josh mentioned in his keynote, which is the trend of governments looking at regulation with potential unintended consequences. So if the governments feel they are unable to protect their citizens in a certain way within their own jurisdiction, then the only way for them, perhaps, if pushed to a corner, is to get out of the global internet that we have today. There is a possibility for that. It could be also because of a result of conflict or war that results in that as well. So there is a possibility. Now the question then is, what is the likelihood of this happening? Well, increasingly we seem to be feeling that's the case. So there is that possibility. But on the other hand, what's the likelihood of humankind coming together again to have the same ubiquitous interoperable internet that we actually stumbled upon? In my view, I feel that we actually stumbled upon the internet because the fathers of the internet, none of them are as rich as Mark Zuckerberg. And why? Why is that? Because they did not intend to build the internet for the sake of economic prosperity or a purpose. They did not build the internet to become an entrepreneur, to earn money. They built the internet for the purpose of interoperability and communication. And I'm going to pause there because I think a good question that Mayan raised was, is interoperability and security necessarily opposites? And in some ways, I'm hinting at it. In some ways, maybe, because the fathers of the internet did not think about security at all when they invented the internet. So that's something I think we could discuss further. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jaron just mentioned about one key point, because I can actually control the domain name registration from a global point of view. So ICANN would be a very important stakeholder, and I think also the exclusive monopolized supplier for domain name registration. Okay, next layer, we jump into the network layer. That was another monopolized exclusive provider by TWNIC. Paul Wilson will be introduced what we do in TWNIC.
Thanks. Thank you, Kenny. I'll stand up here so I don't have to hold a microphone as well. But look, it's been very interesting. It's a pleasure to be here. I don't know how much more there is to add, but I've got a couple of points. Nicole actually covered some of what I wanted to say, which is basically that the internet being this global, complex, multi-layered network that we all rely on, it's nearly as complex as the world itself today, and we rely on it to be consistent. We rely on it to be complete and consistent in a whole lot of different ways, in the ways that we can connect the applications we use, the way it's managed, the way it's governed. And so in fact, the fragmentation that we see that's going on is not just one thing. It actually can occur in a lot of different ways. It can happen at any of the levels in the stack, from the physical layer up to the applications and the content, and even those higher governance and regulatory layers. It can happen in different physical geographies to different degrees at different times. It can actually happen with different levels of harm, from none at all to quite serious harm. It can also happen deliberately, quite deliberately, and for benefit. The main thing is that fragmentation, let's stop talking about it as a single thing. It's not a binary feature. It's not that the internet is either fragmented or not, and we're trying to keep it not fragmented. It's actually a multi-faceted quality of the network that exists at different times, in different places, for different reasons, in different ways. And I think if we think of the opposite being, let's call it internet integrity. Internet integrity is something that we do aim for. It's an ideal, but it's a very difficult and precious thing. And I'd say that for any of us who do enjoy a sort of a fairly much a comprehensive internet integrity, we're really lucky. I mean, we only have to look at some of the applications that we struggle with every day. I mean, something we take for granted is email. And email is a service that can run on dozens of different platforms, dozens of different software and hardware platforms, dozens of different providers and modes of delivery, different devices, and yet it's the same. We use the same email address across the world. It's a beautiful thing that we take for granted, but what frustrates the heck out of me is not having the same thing in instant messaging, not having the same thing in social media. We've just lost that, and we kind of don't even realise we've lost it. So I think there's something here about our self-awareness and what it is that we take for granted, and what it is that we really want to protect about the internet, because it is integrity and it's a lack of fragmentation. But we need to understand that very well. Now, to TWNIC, our vision at TWNIC is of an open, global, stable and secure internet, and for us, fragmentation is very much about the second part. It's about the globalness of the internet, the global validity and operability of IP addressing, of routing, and of the policies that control those things. So the ideal perception of the internet as a global network is that any point on the internet with an IP address can reach any other point of the internet, no matter where it is around the world. And it actually has been a struggle, and it's a continual struggle and a continual cooperative effort to maintain that. We take it for granted, but it actually can be lost. The interesting thing is that it's also lost to some extent deliberately. We have something called network address translation, which interrupts the ability of your endpoint in your home to connect to everything. We have caching, which actually provides a much more efficient way to deliver web content locally to a user. That kind of interrupts the global nature of the internet, because you're not getting the content you're asking for from that endpoint, you're getting it from an intermediate point. And in fact, the most extreme version of caching that's happening all over the world at the moment are the CDNs. So the CDNs have got elaborate ways of getting content close to you, so that even if you're accessing a particular domain name, the same domain name from different places around the world, you're accessing what looks like the same content. You're actually not taking it from that single place, that single point of reference. It's being distributed magically around the network. And that definitely is a huge interruption to the idea of a global end-to-end, point-to-point simple network. Now that's deliberate and it's actually in everyone's benefit, but one of the downsides of that, which I heard predicted actually by TWNIC's chief scientist some years ago, was what he called the death of transit. The prediction was that we really no longer actually need this end-to-end internet, that this idea of transit from your position on the internet to another point far away is dying, and that we won't need it anymore. Now, it's very fortunate for Zoom that we didn't let the end-to-end model disappear, that we didn't accept the death of transit and just accept that CDNs are the end game, because we wouldn't be connecting to each other on Zoom from point to point, end to end, all over the world. And I don't have the stats, perhaps Josh does, but I would suggest that end-to-end traffic since COVID on the internet has accelerated greatly and grown greatly as a proportion of the traffic that exists on the internet. So it's very lucky, in fact, that the internet is as malleable and flexible as it is. You know, the internet is its own best friend and possibly enemy, and that the technology can be adapted. NAT is something that was never predicted, network address translation, but it was implemented through a quick kludge that actually saved a great deal of bother in address management in the early days, and the same for many other technologies. But the point is that these are technologies and techniques that can be adopted because the internet is malleable like clay. You know, you can take it, you can use it, you can shift it around. And I think the thing that we've got to really avoid by self-awareness is making sure that we don't cut so deeply into that clay, or we don't bake that clay in such a way that we kind of make decisions today that can't be reversed. And that's where fragmentation, instead of just being a come and go sort of quality of the network that we need to recognise and deal with in different ways, that's where fragmentation can become a permanent thing that would be could represent a huge loss of opportunity in the future for the internet in decades or centuries' time to be whatever it could be in the future. One example of that could have been back in the early days if IP addresses were, if it was decided that IP addresses were to be managed purely on a national basis and allocated to countries, and many people wanted to do that, that would be absolutely a hard division in the otherwise malleable form of addressing in the internet infrastructure that would be actually almost impossible to reverse. So, I mean, I'm very proud of the way that in our area, in the IP addressing internet layer, the operational layer of the internet, we've been able to maintain the global interoperability of the internet, the flexibility and malleability, so that it's been able to provide these services. And we do need to keep up the work, though, because as I've said before, it's not something to take for granted. It's something to actually continually work for, at least in the community of responsibility for that, so that other people don't have to worry about it. I think that's all from me. Thanks for the time being.
Okay, thank you, Paul. You introduced the basic component of IP addresses and what is critical for people to have an end-to-end internet topology as well. Because right now, a lot of people, probably didn't use the end-to-end internet. They're using VPN, they're using a lot of firewall to partition the network from each other's. But anyway, let's go back to today's topic. I just raised one question. If any of you who are really interested to respond, please do. My question will be, I recap the question raised by Nicole. He's talking about 20 years ago, the internet's technical issue with political implication, but nowadays, internet become a political issue with technical implication. So regarding to that involvement, the internet was developed from a lab. But after so many years, evolution and the governance model of the internet probably evolved as well. And how likely the internet governance model going to be evolved? Is it likely to survive under current political agenda? Is political regime or even regulation regime is going to change the paradigm of internet governance? So any of you, please feel free to jump up. Nicole first.
Okay. Yeah, follow Kenny's question. I think I just make some sharing for my observation. Yeah, because as I mentioned that when we talk about the fragmentation, we should be quite clear which part of the internet and what kind of fragmentation we are mentioned. Yeah, because every issues we need different approaches to solve the issue or to work together. So what I observed is that for the time being, from the very beginning, the internet is the technical issue, and the goal is to access and connect to every devices and including every people. Yeah, and I think as time goes by, most of us we see internet as utility. Yeah, because we use internet to provide our normal usage. Yeah, but right now the issue, from my point of view, the fragmentation issue is caused by because we put so many business and even include the government affairs on the internet. So the issues caused by all this kind of behavior, including online safety, digital cyber crime, attack, and even other critical issue, infringement of copyright, something like that. And at the same time, there are so many different new technology, including AI and other deep learning, something like that. So make things complicated. And because the problem caused by the usage of the internet. So people would like to find some mechanism, especially government, especially regulator, because they need to protect their citizen. And some government maybe want to do a surveillance or censorship. So the regulator and the people would like to solve the issue caused by the usage, the using of the internet. So the proposed solution maybe will erode or break the interoperability, the specified meaning from the very beginning of the usage of the internet. So that is what my observation. So if we would like to let the internet to let us use the internet just like a utility, we need to try to work together and use multiple stakeholder model to find some mechanism to discuss and work together, and even include the international framework. Just recently, you can see from the G7. I think the leaders from the G7 country, they proposed the international framework for AI regulation, something like that. So that is my observation. Yeah.
Okay, right. Thank you. Any other comment or any so? For example, like we're talking about political implication and intervention to the internet governance, and that could potentially create another additional issue we haven't experienced before. For example, like data localization, and that could be impact the free flow of data. And so I'd like to pose to Josh. Do you like to comment regarding to the potential barrier created by data localization?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually struggling a little bit here with this and would welcome feedback from the other panelists. I'd always sort of felt, I'd say over the last, 5 to 8 years, as the global political environment was becoming more complex and antagonistic, that there were going to be moves afoot by certain governments to, create their own internet or, create a coalition that would hive off a different system. And as far as I can tell, that's not happening, or it hasn't happened yet. And it strikes me that one of the reasons might be that to the extent that governments have different views of, say, where data should be located, or what sorts of speech should be permitted, or what kinds of content should be allowed, they have tools for enforcing those policy preferences without undermining the technical architecture of the internet as we know it. And so in a way, I feel more comfortable with the idea that the internet, the technical internet will remain in place, but maybe a little bit more pessimistic about how it will be used by governments and the ways in which they will seek to segment themselves off or suppress content or create blocking statutes for activity within their jurisdictions, and that's I think precisely where efforts like Japan's DFFT come in, which is ideally as large of a coalition as possible, and theoretically that should be everybody on the planet, although that's not realistic. Really identifying what's the set of activity that we all agree we want to have a global internet for, and what are the specific risks to trust, in particular to safety, security, and privacy that we understand can impede us from enjoying those global benefits, and how can we create a system, therefore, of open global data flows that sort of strip out only those risks and control for only those risks, while not, in other words, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, to use an expression. So I wish I had a better answer, but I do, and I would love feedback from others on whether my supposition about that is actually, in your eyes, true.
Okay, pass over to Jialong regarding to specific issue. For example, if it's probably better position to respond by ICANN is the internet sanction issues. For example, probably the internet sanction could be frozen some particular country, their top level domain, or could be frozen a particular region, their IP addresses resources. And how are we going to respond to the internet sanction? Do we should have a multi-stakeholder, self-volunteer internet sanction, or should we get an internet sanction by the universal court order? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll add to what Josh is mentioning just now. So actually, what your supposition is correct. In other words, this Splinternet question at the fundamental level of unique identifiers, most governments I've spoken to all agree that the one single internet is the best thing that we have today. Most, if not all, agree to that. There must be some kind of factor that would force the governments to weigh that whatever else it is, be it maybe a world war, is more important than the interoperable internet that we have today. But at this point, I don't think so. I think we are pretty secure in terms of sitting on the current interoperable global internet that we have. The risks are still there, the factors are still there, but where we are today, I think the likelihood of us wanting to have the same internet is pretty clear. I think that's the good news for most of us. So again, it's what can we do at the different layers on top of the internet in terms of the different areas that we have to look at. Those are the areas that we have to be concerned about. Now, tying back to Kenny's question about political issues. So we just used the Russia-Ukraine situation. So when the war happened, Ukraine wrote to ICANN and said, ICANN, you should remove .ru from the root. And if it was not ICANN, which is a global multi-stakeholder organization that managed this function, but if, for example, if this function were managed by a UN body or a multilateral process, what will happen then is the biggest countries with the biggest voices would then be able to push the agenda. And as it was quite clear, at the multilateral setting, sanctions were pushed, sanctions were put forward. Some governments decided they will not deal with Russia at all. That agenda would then spill over into the internet route. And if that were the case, then the likelihood of .ru being deleted from the root would have been quite high. In fact, probably 90%. I think that's the probability of it. But because ICANN's role is charged with just maintaining the interoperable internet without the political agenda overtaking it, ICANN, in maintaining its mission, had to then push back and say, sorry, we can't. Because by deleting a country code top-level domain at the request of any other country, that means we have to do that for anybody else. So if there is another case of a war elsewhere, then we could immediately splinter the internet. And that's something that we didn't want to do. So it's quite clear from, at least from Kenny's question, that the right organizations carrying out the functions need to be neutral and need to focus on the mission. But if it were overtaken by political agenda, then the internet that we sit on would probably break.
Okay, thank you, Jerome. Before move over to Paul, I just a little bit additional explanation regarding to the topic I'm talking about. Actually, ICANN is a multi-stakeholder bottom-up decision-making process, and majority of tasks for regarding to how to remove a country code, basically that was working group I'm chairing, and that's a CCTPDP for working group under ICANN. And regarding to that working group, we definitely we try to develop the policy. Let's go back to the history of the internet. Another policy we have is a sunrise policy. We try to create something new. For example, how to create a new CCTLD, new GTLD, but we don't have sunset policy at the very beginning. So that's why we don't have that kind of sunset policy. It's actually almost the same in TWNIC. We have a lot of policies, a sunrise policy, but we don't have sunset policy. But right now, we probably can work on some sort of sunset policy. For example, like eligibility of the IP address holder, eligibility of domain name registration, and that's pretty mature. We have sunset anyway. So go back to the working group itself, and we do define the deselection policy itself. And based on certain criteria, certain eligibility, and ICANN will grant ICANN the power to remove certain country code if they match certain criteria. So even the removing process, we still have some cooling cycle, for example, 10-year, 20-year cooling cycle to allow the domain name holder, probably the domain name will not release to the market, that could be jeopardize existing holder or trademark holder. That's temporary, what we do for the working group. Right now, move to the Paul Wilson. Any sanction you ever been exercised or intend to exercise?
No, not at all. Actually, Kenny, we're largely free of that particular consideration for now. I wanted to come back to Wolfgang's quote, which you started with, Kenny, about governance and politics and technology. And I think something that we see that we're grappling with a lot and have done for the last 20 years in internet governance is actually a fragmentation of that term, because governance in English is a fairly simple term that refers not to control but to moderating a process or moderating something like an engine that's got a governor on it that kind of helps to regulate the speed. And so governance is not related to governments in its original concept, but what I find is that in many languages and in many minds, governance is something that is only done by a government. That's it. And so when we talk about internet governance, the first fragmentation, the first misapprehension we're creating is that we're talking about something that governments need to do. And so I think that's something we really need to face, and it's a great shame that we didn't pick, back in those early days, didn't pick a different term like internet cooperation as something that described the process that we're all involved with. The technology part, I mean, it worries technology people a lot to hear that these days internet governance is mostly politics and it's just got a technical component. It sounds like an afterthought. And that would be a bit like saying that the world of international travel is a political process with an aviation component or with a technical component that has to do with the planes, as though you don't really need to worry about that. It's actually more about the big picture, and it's more important with the internet because the pace of change, compared, for instance, with the airline industry, the pace of change is so much faster on the internet. the possible consequences are so much greater. I mean, airlines don't bring down countries, or we don't have governments feeling that mismanaging an airline could bring down an entire country or a government. But we do have those kinds of risks when we're talking about internet governance. But nevertheless, the pace of change and the much greater consequences, we really have to be very sure that technical component doesn't become less and less of a component and more of an afterthought, because it's absolutely critical, and the pace of change is remarkable. And I know, for instance, in the relatively small world of the ICANN Government Advisory Committee, that just over the COVID years, maybe 60% of the GAC members were changed, and so we have people with important roles in understanding and in moderating, in cooperating, in governing the internet, and yet they're subjected to kind of political processes of rapid turnover and change of attention amongst the people who really need to understand a lot more about the technology. And we really have to find a way, a multi-stakeholder way, and hopefully this kind of event is a good contribution. But we have to find a way to make sure that the technology component doesn't just become less and less while the politics actually becomes the driving force.
Okay, right, thank you. Actually, we do have a GAC member here. That could be last forever. Okay, very.
Maybe I can speak from another point of view, because I have ever been to the regulator of Taiwan. So I think from government side, from regulator side, the mindset of the regulation, I think, should be changed. In the past few years, because the government officers, right now, I think they must know that many new issues, they cannot propose any solution just top down. Especially especially for the new technology. And so in the past few years, we can see some mechanism, maybe named PPP, public and private sector, and other model, and including multiple stakeholder model for new issues, especially raised by the technology. I think, because it changed rapidly and makes so many different kind of social impacts. So of course, it will influence the many different kind of multiple stakeholders. So I think from government side, we should communicate with government, with regulator, and try to work with them together and let them know that it is very difficult to propose any solution just top down. We need the bottom up. We need to work together with the internet community.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. And May, would you like to share your view regarding to any government intervention? Sorry, correct. Should be public-private partnership engagement. Can you share your view, May? Are you still online? We haven't opened floor yet. Probably not.
He's speaking, but I'm not sure if he can hear me.
We can hear you. Thank you.
You're asking about public-private partnerships when it comes to internet fragmentation?
In terms of internet governance or fragmentation, is that going to be a new model for the public-private partnership or government public intervention?
Well, I think that it's pretty interesting to hear a lot of the questions, and I do share Josh's probably frustration at the different things which are happening right now. I think that there are a lot of moving parts to digital sovereignty, etc. But as Jiarong pointed out, I think that there are, at least within ICANN and the internet governance processes that we've developed. With apologies, of course, to Paul, because yes, governance is a pretty loaded term that is interpreted differently. I think that there are a lot of checks and balances when it comes to this decision making. And in terms of public-private partnerships, I do see an increasing number of people who are engaged within the process on behalf of their company, which means that they're not participating for themselves, but they're participating as a company because they know that it's important. I think that there are it will continue to be a contested space. I think the one thing that we will, that I would love to see a bit more of is checking on the checkers. So what do I mean by this? I do see a lot of the discussions and the working groups, etc., being captured by a small number of people who will just appear year after year after year. It's true that decisions are made by the people who show up, but I'm a little bit worried that some of the decisions are being captured by, inverted commas, a shadow political agenda, which are being driven by individuals or different types of communities if we're not careful. So I'm encouraged by the fact that there are checks and balances. I'm encouraged by the fact that there are public-private partnerships that are coming in, at least on a discussive and on a working group level, to contribute to the discussion. A lot of stuff does remain to be seen. Again, I do echo Josh's frustration at the fact that there is a lot more Splinternet discussions going on than I would be comfortable with, but I want to trust in the process. It is a very noisy approach towards decision-making democracy. However, I think that it's the best way to go forward doing this. Back to you, Ken.
Thank you, May. So before I open the floor, any last comment? No, hearing none. Okay, so we start to open the floor. And your name and your affiliation, thank you.
TWIGF. Chair, do you have a time for me to read my books? I have only 2 questions.
You have a catch room outside, you can go there.
I have 2 questions. I think the first question is, the first of all is depends on what we are talking about, the fragmentation. But in the loosely way of the fragmentation, to be honest, it's happened already. We should coming back to the reality. The fragmentation is anyway in many places in the world. And so I think no matter is the international organization or whatever, or private sector, you have to be realized how we're going to deal with this kind of fragmentation of the internet. It's very difficult to continue say it's a one world, one internet. That's our first question. And so in that case, we might need to begin to talking about what is the fragmentation impact to the economy and the social life. I think a lot of people, or most of the people in the internet governance community is close by for more than 20 years. We continue to try not to make the fragmentation happen. We did a lot of work, but somehow we didn't have a realistic number to tell the people if the fragmentation really happened, what is the impact to the economy and social life? Particularly the scenario, what is the scenario? Because you just keep telling the people that fragmentation is no good. But can you tell the people, particularly in general public, they don't understand technical people you're saying. They want to see the number. They want to see the scenario, So I think I will expect in the future the ICANN, ITF, IR, whatever, begin to working on to deliver what kind of scenario, what kind of impact to the human life in the future. The last question is for Paul Wilson. As you know, I think from APNIC point of view, I understand your position and the same thing as I can. You know, if we remember last year when Ukraine asked not only ICANN, at the same time asked NCC to remove the IP address. And I would say the NCC in the beginning is the same as the TWNIC. They say, no, we cannot do that. Well, we have a lot of reason to tell them we cannot do that because we are a neutral organization. But I think, Paul, you know that. They go to the court. They go to the court. Because the IP address, they claim IP address is a property. And EU is putting the sanction to Russia. So if one day similar situation happen in Asia, and one government put a statement there asking the TWNIC to remove some other countries' IP address. And of course, I would say you definitely will tell them, no, we cannot do it. Then they go to the Australia court because they claim there's a property. And then people put in the sanction. So how are you going to do it? Paul?
You finished your question?
Yep.
Oh, please remain seated. You are free to answer or response. Up to you. I couldn't remember how many questions he asked.
Well, I'm not sure if I'm the target of the first question or the second, but
the second question
directed to me, which is that about sanctions, and the RIRs as legal organisations, they've got to comply with the laws that govern them, and certainly that applies to court orders and police orders and local laws, of course. I can say that while TWNIC hasn't been subjected to a court order about sanctions, I know that other RIRs have done. And the effect of those court orders have been that the existing address holdings and address allocations that they have in the to the sanctioned entity or geography are frozen. That does not alter the registration details. It doesn't alter the connectivity, which may or may not be given across border and to those addresses. But it does prevent transactions from being taken like additional addresses being allocated or transfers or addresses happening. That's been the outcome of those court orders and the discussions with the RIRs. We haven't had those discussions. That's a good at TWNIC. It's a good precedent that we see there for a sort of clear path, but it hasn't been tested yet. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Next one, Alban.
I have a question for Jiayong, actually. I think this is a elephant in the room in terms of how the identifier being fragmented. I think Mayan slightly touched on this particular item, which is the NFT domains or crypto domains. As you know, we work with a lot of the large brand owners. Over the past 2 years, this is one of the hottest topics that they want to understand more. And it's going to fragment the internet for sure, by definition. So my question is going back to the multi-stakeholder model as well, I want to. So they hate your gut, not you personally, but they hate the concept of ICANN, of a centralized authority. They're really keen on decentralization and all that. How can ICANN engage them, knowing that this is going to have a kind of an impact on society and fragmenting internet? Thank you.
Do you want to respond?
Thank you. Okay, so the first question is, are blockchain domains going to fragment the internet? So thanks for asking this question because I didn't have time to cover this earlier. So I mentioned that actually, what are two potential risk factors to internet fragmentation? One is politics or government agenda. Actually, the other one is emerging technologies. A potential new technology that's so great that everyone just jump onto that new technology and just discarded the existing domain name system that we are all using. Blockchain domains potentially could do this. So actually, the number of registration for blockchain domains during the pandemic, I think is like 7 million top-level domains or something like that, really shot up. The problem is just because currently, if users want to use blockchain domains, they can't use it easily. So they have to apply another mask on top of their browser if they want to access. So most users aren't really using it. But that doesn't discount the possibility of all of humankind deciding, oh, blockchain domains are better than the existing domain name system. So there is a possibility for that. If that happens, then it's a different conversation altogether. Now, the question then becomes like, okay, how should ICANN engage with this community or this group? I think the starting point actually is this community does not have a clear body that represents itself for conversations like that. So I'm part of a cryptocurrency investor community. So the cryptocurrency community is quite the same as blockchain domain community because they like to be anonymous, but it's very hard to make decisions as a result. So the issues with governance that ICANN is grappling with are the same issues that this community needs to think about, but they don't think about it yet. Why? Nobody's really using blockchain domains at this point. So issues like illegal pharmaceutical websites, CSAM, these content are not on those sites yet. But if everyone's using those blockchain domains, the same problems will go over to that side instead. So then somebody needs to come out and then work on engaging. To remain anonymous in the blockchain domain community or the cryptocurrency community would only mean a lack of engagement. And therefore, governments, if they have to protect the citizens will have to move out of this group. So blockchain domains will not be recognized still. So it's a roundabout way of answering your question because we need a body that engages with all the stakeholders, that allows a platform for that engagement to happen. But if the blockchain domain community does not open up this community or this platform for that discussion to happen, then lack of engagement results in everybody moving away from this technology. That's likely going to be the case. Thank you.
I think that's a very easy to explain.
Yeah, and one point, last year we are trying to arrange the topic. We invited the CTO of ICANN and the local blockchain domain name operator, including Handshake and Solana, something like that. Yeah, we arranged a platform to let them discuss. So maybe we can try to find the video. Then, already start a discussion, but just the issue, as Jaro mentioned that. Yeah.
That's one very minor comment because of the community that evolved, they developed their community requirement outside of ICANN regime, but eventually coming back to claim for their legitimacy within the ICANN regime. Also, that happened. But anyway.
I just make a quick comment for the previous questions. And I think you might be so that ICANN CTO office already have published a paper talking about blockchain domain name issues. I think one of the critical issues we have to resolve, and it's not only ICANN, also the blockchain industry, domain name industry, is a name collision problem. If you cannot resolve the name collision, I think, somehow this is a problem we have to resolve before we move on.
Okay, thank you again. Sorry, I apologize again. I keep apologizing to running a little bit late. Before we conclude this section, can we give a big hand to all panelists and also remote panelists, Ben May. Thank you for joining with us. So I move over the mic to the MC today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Huang, for moderating the session for us, and thank you to all panelists for a very animated discussion. We would now like to invite all panelists and the moderator to please have a group photo on stage. At the same time, we would also like to invite our speakers, panelists, our guests of honor to please join us on stage for this group photo. And we would also like to invite our speakers online to please turn on the camera. We are going to have a hybrid group photo with you joining us virtually. Yes, please join us for the group photo. All right. Okay, so just a second as we are moving things around a little bit. Okay. All right. We have more guests joining us, so just a second. Okay, so please look at our photographer over there and a big smile, everyone. Okay, can we have one more photo with thumbs up as well? Okay, please look at our photographer over there. All right, thank you very much. Thank you. Please take your seat downstage. Thank you.